for Comparative and International Study, but I'm the head of Department for Development and Projects at the Mediterranean University in Albania. I will be your moderator for today, and thank you for joining our blended workshop, Youth Involvement in Communist Past in Contemporary Western Balkan. This is a 3-day workshop. It's our first workshop. Actually, it will be followed by other workshops. The 4 workshops will be during the whole year. We're starting with this one at Tirana. Due to COVID restriction, we are having it as a blended one. We'll have 2 days online. You already have the links to join the Zoom. And we have the 3rd day, a visit in the Leaf's house for a very small group of participants. That's unfortunately, we cannot fit more, as I mentioned, due to the COVID restriction. Not losing time and your attention, I will leave the floor to Ms. Juliana Sokoli. She's our executive director for the Center for Comparative and International Study. Yuli, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Navita. Dear everyone, dear panelists, partners, and all participants, on behalf of CCIS, I would like to welcome you today in this workshop. As Nabila said, this is the first workshop that is going to be followed by other 3 workshops organized in the partner countries, specifically in Skopje in June, in Rome in October, and in Paris in January. Then the project will conclude with a final conference that is going to be organized in Tirana during April 2020. The project is going to be implemented in 15 months, targeting youth from Albania, France, Italy, and North Macedonia. Actually, we are very happy to be part of this project because of its importance, especially targeting youth participation, their role, the civil society, the decision makers, academics, politicians, in remembering the past in order to build a future for the development of the society. The ultimate goal of
Okay, that happens normally when we are online. So we're not listening to you yet. So, okay then. Maybe I have to give the floor to Professor Civici. As I mentioned, the focus of this workshop is Albania, its communist past, and how this actually affects Albanians and the Albanian transition. So the keynote speaker for today is Professor Adrian Civici. Hello, Professor. And he will be sharing with us a paper in Crisis of the Albanian Economy in the years of 1980-1990 and its impact on the end of the socialist system. Professor Civici will speak in Albanian and will be provided translation. So please be a little bit more patient to listen to Professor Civici. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, Navila. Përshëndetje të gjithëve, sidomos miqve nga Maqedonia, i nostri amici italiani che sono molto presenti. Io ho collaborato soprattutto con Maria, Rita e molti altri, non è una cosa nuova di vederci. Allora, un po' flas në Shqip, mundohem të flas ngadalë edhe për përkthimin. Është shumë e rëndësishme organizimi i këtyre aktiviteteve dhe i këtyre projekteve që kanë të bëjnë me njohjen dhe më shumë se sa njohja me analizën e të shkuarës.
Hello, everybody. I'm very happy to be here. I would like also to say hello to all my friends from Macedonia and Italy. It is very important, the organization of such events, not only for the recognition, but also for the development of the future.
Sepse jo vetëm në fushën e ekonomisë për cilën do flas pak më thjesht, po dhe në përgjithësi për mentalitetin, arsyetimin dhe mënyrën e veprimit të çdo populli, analiza e të kaluara është shumë e rëndësishme.
And the analysis of the future is not only important for the people, but also for the economy, mentality, and the action of people.
Jo për të njohur atë si pjesë të historisë ose si një kulturë që duhet ta ketë gjithkush për vendin e tij se çfarë ka kaluar.
So not only recognizing culture and the past of a country,
por mbi të gjitha si koncepte që formojnë dhe kulturën tonë të tashme, si nocione mbi cilat ne mbështetemi edhe për të ndërmarrë sot shumë veprime që kanë të bëjnë me të sotmen dhe me të ardhmen. Jemi shumë të ndikuar nga e kaluara dhe prandaj duhet të analizojmë me kujdes.
but also as concepts and notions that will help us for the time being, and in order to help us to take the right actions for the future.
Për kaluar konkretisht në çështjen e fiksuar për sot, ekonomia shqiptare në periudhën më të vështirë dhe më të errët të saj, asaj që quhet koha e socializmit në vitet 1980-1990.
And in order to be more precise, I'd like to talk about the socialist period during the years 1980-1990, which is also known as the most difficult time of Albania.
Ishte në një farë mënyre pasqyrim dhe nxjerrje në sipërfaqe të gjithë atyre gabimeve, qoftë me natyrë politike, qoftë me natyrë teknike, po mbi të gjitha gabimeve me natyrë ideologjike.
And this period is a reflection of mistakes, not only economic terms, but also in other parts, especially considering the ideology.
Dhe jo rastësisht, Shqipëria dhe ekonomia e saj ishte në periudhën më të vështirë në krahasim dhe me të gjithë ekonomitë e tjera të vendeve e Europës qendrore lindore ish socialiste të asaj kohe.
And it is not by chance that Albania was really in a bad situation in comparison with other parts of Europe, Central, East, and etc.
Dhe mendoj që arsyeja kryesore ishte verbëria ideologjike dhe mbyllja totale e mendimit, e gjykimit dhe e shikues përpara në të ardhmen për rastin e drejtuesve të Shqipërisë asaj periudhe.
And I think that the most important aspect is the total closure that Albania had, and also the blindness that characterized that period during that time.
Mbas luftës dytë botërore, Shqipëria u rendit në bllokun lindor, bllokun socialist sovjetik, dhe natyrisht fillesat dhe gjithë politikat e saj ekonomike dhe zhvillimit ishin tipike të një vendi lindor, tipike të një vendi stalinist nga pikpamja e përmbajtjes ideologjike të tyre.
After the Second World War, Albania was in the East Bloc, let's say, list, and all the development policies were according to this ideology.
Dhe deri në vitet 70-80, pak a shumë trajektoria e zhvillimeve dhe zgjedhjeve ekonomike, financiare dhe politike të Shqipërisë ishte pothuajse e ngjashme me ato të vendeve tjera të Europës qendrore dhe lindore.
So during the 70s and 90s, the development of economic policies, financial policies were similar to the Central and Eastern European countries.
Mbas viteve 60, filloi dhe devijimi I parë apo ndryshimi që na çoi në atë situatë që u gjendëm në fund të viteve 80.
After the 60s, the changes began to start, and which led us to the situation that we faced in the 80s.
Në fushën e ekonomisë, Shqipëria nuk pranoi dhe nuk u bë asnjëherë pjesë, qoftë edhe formalisht, e tentativave për disa reforma për ta zbutur sistemin socialist ekonomist dhe për ta bërë më të manovrueshëm dhe më të përshtatshëm.
So during this time, the economic, Albania did not make any progress regarding the reforms to ease this socialist system, but did not take any action.
Dhe atë që dua të theksoj edhe në këtë diskutim sot është pikërisht dominimi total I ideologjisë mbi çdo lloj logjike ekonomike dhe zhvillimi.
And what I want to emphasize today is the total domination of the ideology regarding all kinds of developments.
Dhe kur ekonomia dhe zhvillimi vendosen në diktatin e ideologjisë, nuk mund të priten rezultate qoftë dhe minimale.
And when the economy and development are under the pressure of the ideology, obviously we cannot expect any results in this regard.
Pavarësisht se vende duke filluar nga vende më mendje hapura si Hungaria, si Polonia, si Republika Çeke, deri diku edhe në Bashkimin Sovjetik filluan një seri reformash lehtësuese, Shqipëria nuk bëri gjë tjetër vetëm se vjetëfishoi bustet e Stalinit në territorin e saj dhe në gjithë diskutimet që bënte për zhvillim.
Even though in other parts of Europe, like Hungary, Poland, Czech Republic, and even in some places in the Soviet Union, they started to ease the reforms. Albania did not make any steps to do any reforms, except the fact that it just raised the number of worship, let's say, places for the Stalin leaders.
Dhe këtu nuk bëhet fjalë aq më pak për të marrë një lloj eksperiencë edhe nga ish Jugosllavia që e kishim afër, që ishte një version I socializmit më specifik, vetë administrues, por gjithsesi me më shumë premisa për stimuluar zhvillimin ekonomik dhe social.
And we did not take an example even from our neighbors like ex-Yugoslavia when they had this socialist model of self-administration.
Dhe ajo që ndodhi mas viteve 60 ishte një rikthim dhe zbatim I atyre politikave ekonomike, financiare dhe sociale tipike staliniste.
And what happened after the 60s is going back through implementation of economic, financial, and social reforms that were typically Stalinist.
Të shoqëruara edhe me një lloj megalomanie, sepse një vend I vogël në atë kohë me 2 milion banor, I varfër, nuk mund të ishte fari ose udhëheqësi I socializmit në gjithë botën dhe mund demonstronte me fuqinë ekonomike të tij rezultatet e shkëlqyera në thonjza sociale edhe të zhvillimit që duhet kishte vendi për të bërë simbol në politikat që ndihte.
And this was something that actually was not even possible because a small country with 2 million inhabitants could not and would not be a leader in these achievements, let's say, in economic and financial terms.
Njëkohësisht, tashti që mund të bëjmë analizat pak më qete dhe me më shumë fakte dhe elemente në duar, një ndikim të madh për aq sa u arritën dhe si rezultate, patën edhe ndihma të huaja, fillimisht nga Bashkimi Sovjetik dhe pastaj nga Kina.
And now we have all the facts, so obviously we can make a better analysis, but an important impact had the foreign aids or grants from other countries like the Soviet Union and etc.
Dhe vim në vitin 1980, ku Shqipëria edhe nga pikpamja politike dhe ideologjike ishte prishur dhe me aleatin e vetëm dhe më të madh që kishte në botë, që ishte Kina, dhe u gjend krejt e vetme dhe e izoluar, jo vetëm politikisht, por mbi të gjitha dhe ekonomikisht.
And we come to the 1980s, where Albania politically and ideologically in other aspects as well, where this relation with China were breakdown, and Albania during this period was totally isolated from the rest of the world.
Dhe në vend që të reflektonte në drejtim të hapjes, modernizimit, liberalizimit, shkoi krejtësisht në sens të kundërt.
And instead of going and reflecting towards opening, let's say, of possibilities, Albania went on the contrary.
Shpalli parimin edhe bardho am dhe parimet nuk I shkelim.
And it did actually proclamate one principle that we're going to end up eating grass and we're not going to overstep our principles, let's say.
Ndaloi dhe bile e shpalli dhe tradhtinë ndaj atë çdo tentativë bashkëpunimi ekonomik apo marrjesh kredish nga vendet perëndimore dhe nga vendet tjera të zhvilluara.
And also made it a treason for any kind of action towards economic development or collaboration with other countries.
Deklaroi vendosjen e socializmit integral në çdo qelizë të shtetit dhe të shoqërisë, duke eliminuar totalisht çdo formë pronës private.
And it actually declared an integral socialist approach to all the layers of the government, so thus stopping any other, let's say, approach to any other thing.
Dhe njëkohësisht shpalli si revizioniste dhe të papranueshme çdo lloj reforme që liberalizonte ekonominë apo krijonte kushte për një zhvillim pak më dinamik.
And declared as inappropriate and unacceptable any kind of reform that would create a economic stability based on other forms of approaches.
Dhe gjitha këto në, si thua, fanfaren e sukseseve ideologjike dhe pastërtisë së vendimeve politike për cilat pretendonte se ishte e vetmja në botë që mund ta zhvillonte teorinë marksiste-leniniste siç duhet.
And all this was actually done on behalf of the ideology, as Albania would be the only country in the world that would actually implement the Marxist-Leninist theories.
Dhe pastaj rezultatet përkeqësuan dhe gjendja u përkeqësua nga viti në vit, për të arritur që në vitin 1985-1990 ne të ishim një vend me një konsum ushqimor minimal, një vend me triska apo metallona për shpërndarjen e ushqimeve dhe madhrave të tjera që kishin bënë me nivelin e jetesës me konsumin bazë.
And this led to the years 1985-1990, when the consummation was minimal and we ended up with the food coupons and for the distribution of food.
Kishim një nivel pagash që ishte nga më minimalet e mundshme, sidomos pagat e të ardhurat në zonat rurale, për gjithë ato pjesë të popullsisë që ishte pjesë e kooperativave bujqësore dhe fermave, pra fshatarësisë së vendit.
And the wage salary was a minimal one, especially in the rural areas where the agriculture cooperatives were present.
Për të ardhur pastaj në fund të viteve të 80, pra momentin e rënies murit Berlinit, u u bë e qartë që sistemi i kishte ardhur fundi,
which led to the end of the 80s when the overthrow of the Berlin Wall happened, and it was obvious that the system was coming to an end.
U bë dhe një tentativë e fundit prap politike dhe ideologjike për të justifikuar situatën dhe për të mos pranuar ndryshimin.
There was a last attempt to make this as a political and ideological explanation about what happened.
Duke deklaruar që me gojën e presidentit asaj kohe, Shqipëria nuk është as lindje as perëndim, ka rrugën e saj të zhvillimit.
And the back then president declared that Albania is not west nor east, and it has its own development path.
Dhe në vazhdim ndodhen dy ngjarje të mëdha që i dhanë fund kësaj periudhe dhe këtij sistemi.
Two major events happened afterwards that brought this system to an end.
Së pari ishte, po themi, revolucioni rumun dhe eliminimi dhe ekzekutimi i Ceaușescu bashkë me regjimin e tij.
The first one was the Romanian Revolution, so the elimination of Ceaușescu.
Dhe Shqipëria ngeli guri fundit i dominos nga gjithë vendet e Evropës Qendrore dhe Lindore që nuk kishte ndryshuar.
And Albania was the last on the list of all the countries that had not made a change.
Dhe ajo që solli ndryshimin pastaj ishte lëvizja studentore, e cila u vendos në balë të protestës, kërkesës për ndryshim, dhe ishte, si thuash, porta e parë që u hap drejt fillimit të tranzicionit dhe ndryshimit.
And the action that brought this to an end actually was the student movement, their protest, which led to a number of other events afterwards towards the end of the regime.
Pra, në konkluzion të kësaj këndvështrimi për këtë periudhë të vështirë ekonomike, do doja edhe njerë theksoja pse na duhet ta njohim dhe ta analizojmë siç duhet të shkuarën.
And in conclusion of this very difficult period, I would like to emphasize the fact that why do we need to recognize and to know the past?
Në mënyrë që sot kur flasim për liberalizmin ekonomik, flasim për rregull e lirë, flasim për kapitalizmin apo modelin e tij.
And when we speak today about the economic freedom, free trade and capitalism and its model,
Kur flasim për politikat ekonomike që duhet ndjekim,
when we talk about the economic policies that we should follow,
për klimën e biznesit dhe integrimin ndërkombëtar të Shqipërisë,
for the business climate and the international integration of Albania,
duhet në nënvizojmë në arsyetimin tonë pikërisht faktin që një ideologji, një konceptim i gabuar ose i keq vlerësuar i këtyre koncepteve mund na çojë në rezultate të padëshiruara, ashtu siç mund na ndihmojë jashmase për të pasur sukses dhe për të pasur atë zhvillim që duhet.
and the fact why we need to emphasize it is to show that one ideology, one concept, if it is wrong and it's not seen for what it is, it might lead to bad and very bad consequences, as it can lead to successes and development.
Sidomos për brezin e ri, nuk mjafton vetëm të thuash se ka qenë një periudhë e vështirë, ka qenë një periudhë negative, ka qenë një kohë që nuk duhet vi më, sepse kaq nuk mjafton për të qenë sigurt që në vendimet që marrim sot, në politikat që ndjekim sot, në këndvështrimet që ndjekim sot, nuk kemi bërë atë analizë që duhet të këtij binomi midis ideologjisë dhe vendimarrjes politike dhe ekonomike.
And it is very important for the youth generation, not only to know this period as something that was in the past, was very bad, should have not happened, etc. But it's very important to recognize and to know very well what happened in order to take the right decisions for the development of ideologies and other policies in the future.
Moment që na përmendni shpesh kur ishim në universitet në atë kohë, na thuaj gjithmonë që kapitalizmi është një sistem sundimi I njeriut nga njeriu, ose shfrytëzimi I njeriut nga njeriu.
I would like to conclude this speech actually with an example from when I was a student, and it was said to us that actually capitalism, it means that it's something that a person, a human being exploits another human being.
Ndërsa socializmi është krejt e kundërta.
Whereas socialism is the opposite, the total opposite.
Dhe ne rinim të tuar sepse e kundërta ishte prapë shfrytëzimi I njeriut nga njeriu.
And we were speechless actually, because even the contrary, the opposite for us, it was the same. So it was exploding from one human being to another.
Dhe kjo vinte sepse aq prezente ishte ideologjia sa pak merri mundimi që të shpjegoj thelbi mekanizmat për mbajtja e çdo sistemi. Po mjaftonte që njërin ta shajë, tjetrin ta lavdërojë dhe ishte korrekt përpara partisë dhe udhëheqësit si qytetari I mirë.
And this came because the ideology and the other policies that were not actually explained into their core what they meant, but it was enough just to praise one and to say bad things about the other, and then you'd be an example, an exemplary, let's say, a citizen, and it was enough.
Pra, për ta mbyllur, ky ishte edhe mesazhi që doja të ndaja sot me ju, sidomos me një brez më të ri që ndoshta e ka kaluar në raftet e bibliotekave dhe historisë në periudhë të kaluar, po që duhen disa breza që ne të shkëputemi nga ndikimet që janë kalën, sidomos në disa forma menduarit, analizuarit dhe vepruarit. Kështu që sa më mirë ta analizojmë dhe ta kuptojmë të kaluara, aq më të qartë do jemi në vendimet që marrim për sotme dhe për të ardhmen.
And in conclusion, I wanted to say especially to the youth and young generation present here, but not only that, it is very, very important to analyze the past, because it is going to help us to take the right decisions for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Civiti, and thank you very much, Yuli, for the translation. We will follow with the other speaker. Then we collect the questions to both of them. So please, you can write in the chat if you have question for Professor Civiti, and then question for Professor Papa. So now the turn is to, and I'm pleased to introduce Professor Henrietta Papa. She's an Albanian historian at the Department of History at the University of Tirana. And she is the author of many monographies, and her research interest includes modern history, communism, and memory, with focus in Albania. Today, she will be talking about communist legacy and memory making in Albania. So your floor is yours, Professor Papa.
Thank you, Nevila, and hello to everyone, and thank you especially for having me here talking about communist legacies and memory making in Albania today. And I'm really happy to join this meeting on Zoom online. I wish to you a good health. And yeah, it's really a pleasure and challenging for me talking to young people, which who's I'm looking here. So hello. What I will talk about today is a thing that is very special to my research focus, which is memory in Albania today and some public discourses that we had recently and we're continuing having in Albania about our way of dealing with the communist past. First of all, I would say that also 30 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall, the history of communism per se still presents itself as one of the most polarizing and controversial themes in Eastern Europe, culture of memory in general. While some governments advocate the legal and historical investigation of communist rule after the fall of the Iron Curtain, others confront their recent past with denial or idealization. There have been numerous studies on memory, especially in the sense of the famous quote of Pierre Nora, Lieu de Mémoire, realms of memory, as expressed in monuments, in memorials, artworks, as well in the school textbooks. Nevertheless, Nora's approach to memory has proved enormously fruitful, and wherever national identity seems to be in question, memory comes to be a key to national recovery through reconfiguration of the past. After the collapse of the communist, memories were unfrozen on both sides of former Iron Curtain. Both personal and collective memories were liberated from constraints imposed by the need to states' legitimation and friend enemy thinking associated with the Cold War. In Central and in Eastern Europe, this post-communist age, it seems that Easterns, as we are calling ourselves, are most sensitive to two things: communality and the past. The return of memory has taken place on multiple levels, and there has been a process of Nachholende, as the Germans say, catching up the nation building, for which collective memories have been mobilized. But in a new political situation after the 1989, the nature of a pluralist society itself presupposes different interpretation of the past, sometimes very contradictory. What about the memory in nowadays Albania? Well, in any culture, collective memory conveyed through rituals, ceremonies, similar events, reinforce a link with the past of a kind that involves not explicit reflection on the distance that separates us from it. We usually regard such reflection as becoming possible only with the emergence of historiography, which is a literary genre that aims, among other things, to record, to preserve information about events worth mentioning or worth remembering. But this is a political, this is a social task at the border of historiography, society and politics that underlines the danger of any political of history as historiography was used during the totalitarian rule. Historiography here in Albania is affected by the political agenda. This is the fact. And the memory is not only a recollection, but it's also a political endeavor in nowadays Albania. Today in Albania, the research on communism and of the memory of it, I would say that it's in the beginning, although these 30 years have been passed since the fall of communism in 1991 in Albania. The studies of communism and on memory of communism are very poor, scarce, reduced in some newspaper articles, publication of former political prisoners, some monographs. But I would say that communist crimes are not deeply studied, and the only serious study on violence and terror in Albania to be mentioned worth is the publication until today of several volumes of the encyclopedia of the victims of communism in Albania, published by the Institute for the Study of Communist Crimes and its Consequences in Albania. Thus, the study of communism and its memory from the frame of cultural studies consists only in a recently published study with interviews also on collective memory, But I would say that that crucial communist studies or communist past or memory of communism are still missing. Today, as witnesses to the tragic events of communism, today the witnesses of communism, the victims are passing away. Politicians, historians, representatives of associations or NGOs are struggling for the reconstruction of a social memory of the past in Albania. This finds its expression also in the commemorative acts, memorials, private initiatives. The public discourse and important debates demonstrate the changes in social consciousness relating to the past events in Albania, and the official policies of history must tackle the difficult task of strengthening the national identity for the normative formation of the newly erected democracy and establishing the elements of transitional events in memory like communism in Albania. In the framework of which the scholars called here the Europeanization path that post-communist Albania has to follow, this Europeanization, it is expected that Albania should apply the European transitional perspective of the politics of communist memory. EU induces and encourages an ideal situation in which the memory of communism will be acknowledged equally to that of the Holocaust, for example. In this perspective, the political struggle of European actors aiming at criminalizing communism is theorized as a rightful attempt that calls for recognition of value of distinctly East European experience that has not been universally shared in Europe. The basis of this recognition-seeking campaign is that all victims of the past injustice deserve equal respect, irrespective of the causes of their sufferings. But the EU politic of recognition has two unreflective features. The first one is the direct causal link between history and politics per se. The past determines regional difference, which automatically calls for public recognition. Seeking reconciliation between competing vision of history, the thesis of politics of recognition mistakes the memory claims of the actor for history. While the second unreflective feature concerns the Eastern nature of communism, an experience directly known only in the Soviet member states and the satellite countries as Albania was. In this view, the memory of communism in its currently canonized form is the outcome of a bottom-up process through which the Eastern experience of Europe has finally been acknowledged aside the founding experience of the Holocaust. Charles Meyer, who is a very well-known American historian of the Cold War, actually has written on a hot and a cold memory, referring to the Nazis and communist memories. And this is exactly what about the memory in Albania. According to me, this is exactly a cold memory of communism in Albania, where from the point of the Western intellectuals, some of whom are Marxists for decades, communism, socialism is considered mild, mellow, because it's not enough study, and because too many of former communist evidence lack the concept of shame and personal regret towards the crimes or the victims. Nostalgia, thus, of communism past is very present, actually. So, after 30 years of the collapse of communism in Albania, the communist discourse and the way how we Albanians recall our communist past have been very controversial. One of the main targets of those who reject actually the notion of the criminal communist regime and the efforts to commemorate the victims of Hoxha, and where Hoxha was a dictator of Albania during almost 45 years of communism here. So is the institute, the above mentioned for me, the Institute for the Study of the Communist Crime and the Communist Consequences in Albania, with its work. For example, I will give you an example. The latest casualty, I call it, of this fight between this institute and the former perpetrators or the former communist officials was the former director of this institute, Agron Tufa, who is a renowned writer, a translator of international literature, who had publicly before denounced the former secret police officers and perpetrators still being active in the state administration in Albania, and called for the stricter lustration measure and decommunistization of Albanian society. Agron Tufa continuously asked the ban of the communist symbols in Albania, which were recently reappearing in several public events in Albania. The last one was the appearance was set up by the municipality of the capital, Tirana, during the national feast in November 2019 of the big portraits of communist partisan fighters killed during the World War II in the main boulevard in Tirana, making the 75th anniversary from Nazi liberation. This portraying of the partisans caused many debates on the World War II events in Albania, and Agron Tufa, the director of the institute, criticized and called the partisan photographs as an act of hypocrisy toward the victims of communism in Albania today. Although he tried to seek help from several foreign embassies in Albania and international representatives in Albania, his live threats pretending was ignored by many foreign representatives who have shown, actually for me, many times not to understand the local realities here and distance themselves from the local troubles, as they call them. Thus, it seems that although many years have passed since communism disintegrated in Albania and many scholars have documented numerous communist atrocities, the communist period remained a hot potato of the public and political discourse. Many Albanians remain unaware of enormous scale of violation of human rights during the communist years or period. In the last years, communism has begun to attract the consideration of voices for revision of communist atrocities are on rise, as well the nostalgia feelings are on rise. Agron Tufa sought political asylum in Switzerland due to his life threatenings. For example, in 2016, the OSCE office in Albania presented a survey about how Albanians see the communist past of their country and on what they know about the former regime and how they dealt with its legacy. Based mostly on circa 1,000 interviews with people of different age, gender, education, geographic locations, political status as a former persecuted or imprisoned persons, the study revealed rather ambiguous perception and rather an uneven scale of historical knowledge about the communist rule and life during that period. Almost half of the people of the survey had a positive perception of communist regime in Albania, probably due to this nostalgia. Most of them also did not see the legacy of Albania's communist past as a present problem for the country. On the other hand, the survey results showed the lack of knowledge of the former regime among young people and the lack of interest in learning more about communism in Albania in general. This survey revealed that 42% of Albanians believe Stalinist dictator of Albania, Enver Hoxha, had a positive impact on history of the country. Not much less than the 40% who see his impact as negative. Thus, one can conclude that from this survey's finding, the perpetrators are very nostalgic of their past, while the victims are very traumatized and still are looking for justice to be implemented in the society in a need for a transitional justice. The young generation is faced with amnesia, as many former political prisoners are dying off, their voices are decreasing, the early 1990s, at the beginning of the 1990s, optimism on reparation, lustration, justice is vanishing. And those born in post-communist Albania have not enough information from the school curricula, school books, or just are careless of what communism was about in Albania. Daily stressful routine, the economic, the social troubles have also affected the ways how people perceive communism today. Nostalgia, amnesia as well, the revision of communism are characterizing the path for transition to democracy, as are the demands of the former political oppressed people for a condemnation of communist atrocities and implementation of the transitional justice. Because of the complex nature of memory within the debate around coming to terms with the past, one could feel the sensitivity of this process. In Albania, the memorial contraposition between victims and perpetrators has remained deadlocked in an internal confrontation and reciprocal accusation of past continuity with the regime. Because of this overreaching situation, for many years, proposing any kind of reflection on memory of the regime was highly controversial, as it was clear that there was no room for negotiation, any conciliatory middle range. The policies proposed in order to deal with the communist past so far have been rather partial or inconsistent. In 2006, for example, the Parliament of Albania adopted a resolution condemning the crimes committed by the communist regime by declaring that the communist totalitarian regime of Albania and that of Enver Hoxha, the dictator that led Albania after the World War II until 1991, was marked with widespread violence of human rights, murders, individual and collective executions, with and without court processes, death in concentration camps, death from starvation, tortures, eviction, slave labor, physical and psychological terror, genocide for political background or heritage ownership, and violation of freedoms of expression, thought, press, religious belief, and political pluralism. The Albanian parliament condemned dictator Enver Hoxha as the founder, inspirer, leader, and executor of the most egregious communist dictator system in Eastern Europe, which led to the extreme isolation and impoverishment of Albania, and demanded the removal of all the titles and decorations given to him by the communist regime. The parliament called for the revision of the communist system symbols, dates, which marked the installation of the communist dictatorship in Albania, as well the removal of these dates from the official state protocol. At the end, the Albanian parliament invited independent academics, scholars, historians, experts to intensify their research on the objective determination and the verification of Albania history during the communist dictatorship. But in the framework of this EU path that I mentioned, post-communist Albania has to follow. It is expected that Albania should apply this European transitional perspective on the politics of communist memory. According to the last European resolution, the European Parliament resolution, the memory of communism should be acknowledged equally to that of Nazism or fascism. The latest European Parliament resolution was adopted on September 19th, 2019. It was the resolution on the importance of the European remembrance for the future of Europe, which calls for a common culture of remembrance that rejects the crimes of fascist, Stalinist, and other totalitarian and authoritarian regimes of the past as a way of fostering resilience against modern threats to democracy, particularly amongst the young generation. In this perspective, all victims of past totalitarian injustices deserve equal respect, and human rights violations are remembered and brought before courts of law, and to guarantee that such crimes will never be repeated. This European Parliament resolution stresses the importance of keeping the memories of the past alive because there can be no reconciliation without remembrance. But as I said, in Albania, we need to make more efforts towards accomplishing these goals of this resolution, but not only of this resolution, also on the resolutions that the Albanian parliament has drafted. To my opinion, we are far away from having a large expose of what happened during communism in Albania. We need to do much more, and especially in the school curricula, where the communism is reduced to very, very few hours in comparison to other historical periods. And as I said, the younger generation either do not care of what happened, either don't know really what happened. And several surveys, not only of that of the OSCE, but also other surveys of the other NGOs, show this risk of amnesia among the Albanians regarding the communist past. So this was these were my thoughts on memory making today, and on this public discourse on communism, how we dealt, how we confront, how we came to in terms with our communist past. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your speech, and I hope the youngsters that we have today present at our Zoom, they are interested to know more and get more interested by both speeches that we had. So I'll just would like to emphasize something, that in the beginning of this project, we were very enthusiastic. When we thought writing down this project, this is a group of us thinking of writing down this project, we were, and all of us work with students, we come from universities. We figured out that exactly the needs, the young generation needs to know more of that period. Many of them that are here today, they are born after 1990s. So they don't know what really happened, and the school books don't really show. And here and there are some people talking about, but they are mostly opinionists, and they are not really funded to research and to the facts of that period. So we need more and more to have this kind of discussion. And just letting you know that after we open up the call for application for this workshop, there were 85 young people that applied to be part of this workshop today. And all of them had to answer to some of the questions, why they are participating in this workshop, why they find the workshop interested, and what's the impact that they are expecting from the workshop, and how they will spread the word with others. And they are very, very interesting answers. Actually, maybe later on, we'll try to summarize them and write them down and send it to the researchers and the academicians that we have as speakers for today and tomorrow event. So before going to the questions, I'll just say 2 words about decommunistization in Albania. Just following up what Professor Papa said, I'll just share a picture that I don't know that some of us in Albania, sure, we are familiar, but I'm sure that our friends from Italy, from France, and from Macedonia, North Macedonia are not that familiar. Dear friends, this is a photo taken on February 20, 1991. This year was the 3rd anniversary, and this is the moment of the fall of the monument of Hoxha, the Albanian dictator. This event was And it is yet a fundamental moment in the change of one era to another in Albania. Imagine if we today, as Albanians, did not have such an act. I'll show another picture. People feel freedom. We would, if we didn't have that act, we would not have an event to confirm to ourselves the fact of being free people. We would not have an act, the absence of which would make us ashamed before you, the future generation. Without such an act, which today might seem not a big thing, but go 30 years before, when those courageous state television journalists who had to take risks to disobey to the orders of their bosses would not take a shot of this picture. This is a testimony. It's just only one picture. But every time that we turn to these existing scenes, we feel a certain enthusiasm because of that atmosphere. At that time, I was a student. After almost half of a century, under the most brutal communist dictatorship, the process of being released from the great Albanian prison, as we used to call it, undoubtedly carries emotions, and emotions for me that I was a student at the time. The student movement, as Henrietta mentioned, hunger strikes, protests, and the overthrow of the Enver Hoxha's monument, and his dragging, I do remember the time, his dragging the monument to the student city were the first acts, and undoubtedly the only ones, of the decommunistization of Albania at the time. What followed was the transformation of a popular revolution that began with its momentum, the fall of the monument of Enver Hoxha, into a political agreement which the old casts to gently remove it from the political scene, despite the most unprecedented crimes and injustice that happened in this country, that they did committed against its own people. Communists and mindsets have accompanied us through all our transition. They appeared as a sign, as was mentioned before, in the key stages and in many reforms that the states of Albania is taking. In every constructive process of Albania, hybrid democracy, communism was a shadow, is still a shadow, and has been remained hidden under the political elites, the culture of Albania, and the inability of us to break away from our darkest period, in fact, shows the weakness of our self-perception. Not only that, but after 3 decades, as I mentioned, in this February was 30-year celebration, we are not simply facing the inability to push this period, but today we are witnessing the tendency of return of the old communism signs, symbols, graphics, ideology, a little bit sweetened with the idea that failure of our democracy can be replaced with a golden period. Albania, unlike the former communist countries in Eastern Europe, has failed to decommunistize its society. Probably it's done this is in purpose. In 1997, 70,000 files of persons connected with the communist system disappeared from our archives, as well as over 1,000 concrete names of high-ranking officials who are still implicated in the Albanian politics disappeared. Is that the fault of the Albanian and the Albanian elites? Some say that it's the fault of the Albanians who produced and maintained this leading class. Others say that it's the fault of the elites who, with the mechanism of power, produced these Albanians of transition full of defects and immorality. Personally, I believe that the people cannot be blamed for its culture. And none of the people was born ready for the process of improvement. It happens with the time. Did we improve? Yes and no. But the thing is that the non-decommunistization of our elites has shifted the issue to be non-decommunistization for our mindset, which are passed down for generation to generation, producing little political improvements in our country. For the final decommunistization to take place, justice must be done. The guilt must be admitted. The perpetrators must be punished. And our society must finally go through the process of self-purification. Only then we all Albanians can hope for visible improvements, for a functioning democracy, and for a smooth end to our transition. So this was what I really wanted to share with you. And maybe we'll move on to the discussion. I see some, I'll just stop sharing maybe. And I'll see that we have two questions. One for Professor Civici, which were the political and economic relations between Italy and Albania in the 80s. Did the Albanian Socialists collaborate with the Italian Communist Party? Professor Civici, did you understand the question or should I translate it for you?
Në fakt, pothuajse gjatë po themi periudhën 1960-1990, për mos shkuar më poshtë, marrëdhëniet ekonomike dhe politike me Italinë, ashtu si me gjithë vendet e tjera që ne konsideronim vende perëndimore kapitaliste, kanë qenë pothuajse inekzistente.
From the 1960s to 1990s, in order not to go even further, the economic relations with Italy and other countries that were considered Western countries were actually almost inexistent.
Ka pasur disa marrëdhënie natyrës politike me Partinë Komuniste Marxiste-Leniniste Italiane.
There have been some relations with the Communist Party, the Italian Communist Party.
Por ajo që është e rëndësishme, ndoshta për shumë nga kolegët e rinj italianë që janë këtu që është befasuese, është fakti që marrëdhëniet kulturore dhe shpirtërore me Italinë kanë qenë maksimale.
But what is interesting, maybe even for the participants from Italy, is that the cultural and emotional, spiritual relations with Italy have been really good.
Dritarja kryesore që Shqipëria kishte në botën dhe veçanërisht me perëndimin ishin televizionet dhe radiot italiane.
The main window for the Albanians to actually know the world were the Italian televisions.
Dhe gjithë brezi jon, po edhe më gjerë, e mësuan italisten nga televizionet dhe italisten u bë gjuha e dytë. Siç është sot anglishtja për shumicën e të rinjve, për në kohën tonë ishte italiste.
And most of my generation, but even further, we spoke Italian as a second language, just like the youngsters today speak English.
Dhe mendoj që kultura italiane, arti italian, muzika italiane kanë influencuar dhe kanë ndikuar shumë edhe në atë momentin emancipimi që pati populli shqiptar kur përmbysi sistemin socialist dhe filloi rrugën e tranzicionit dhe transformimit.
And I think that the whole of Italian culture, art, music, society has had a very important impact in Albania, not only for the language, as I said, but also it was a a very good thing that actually prepared Albanians for the transition period after the overthrow of the regime.
Dhe mendoj që edhe ai eksod aq I madh në 90-ën, 91-ën drejt Italisë, ishte lidhur dhe me faktin se shumica e shqiptarëve Italinë njihnin shumë më tepër se gjithë vendet e tjera dhe u duk sikur po shkonin në shtëpinë e tyre dytë.
And the fact that Albanians in the 90s, they went to Italy first, and they chose Italy as the country to go to, is because they considered it like a second home.
Edhe thjesht për pak humor, një pjesë e tyre u dëshpërua shumë kur zbritin në Itali dhe dikush I tha që mos mendoni që Italia e Pippo Baudos që keni parë në televizor është ajo realia që do gjeni.
And actually, just to humor the discussion is that some of the people were actually disappointed because when they landed in Italy, some people told them that, well, you do not think that Italy is the Italy of Pippo Baudo that you have seen on TV.
Megjithatë, unë për ta mbyllur mendoj që prezenca e kulturës në kuptimin e gjerë të fjalës, kur fshihet edhe pjesa e historisë, edhe pjesa e artit, dhe pjesa e akademisë, dhe shumë gjëra të tjera, marrëdhëniet me Italinë janë maksimale, ashtu siç janë edhe marrëdhëniet ekonomike dhe financiare.
But to conclude it, I would like to say that the relations with Italy in terms of history, art, academy now are at their peak, and like also the economic relations for that matter.
May I add something on this point?
Sure. Sorry, Henrietta, have you seen the questions for you?
Yes, I have seen the question.
Okay.
I would like to add something on the
Okay.
collaboration between both communist parties, of the Albanian one and the Italian one. There was a good collaboration. There existed a good collaboration between both communist Zelotes but not only the communist not Zelotes, sorry, the communist party leaders of Italy and Enver Hoxha and the other. There were some meetings, especially before establishing the diplomatic relations after the Second World War. Actually, Albania and Italy had some problems with in reestablishing the diplomatic relation during communism because Italy occupation of Albania during the Second World War, and not only after 1957 there were some, after the repatriation of 20,000 Italian soldiers and individuals to Italy, they were possible to reestablish the diplomatic relation between both countries. But the links to the Communist Party in this reestablishment of the diplomatic relations was very, very important. But after the 60s, the ways how the Communist Party in Albania, with its Stalinist path, differed from the way how the Communist Party in Italy develops. So I would say that in the 50s, there was a good collaboration between both parties. And then, as Professor Civici said, there was some cultural and educational links, relation between both parties, but the good collaboration was possible only after the fall of communism. And yeah, so about the question, thank you very much for your interest on communist memory in Albania. And to the first question, what extent does the what extent does the communist past of Albania wait on its entry into the European community? Has Albanian democracy been able to overcome communist ideology? Well, it sweats a lot. Actually, as I said, the European Parliament and the EU has has some resolution in condemning the totalitarian regimes as fascism, nationalism, and communism, or Stalinism, as it's called in the latest resolution of 2019. In regard of the importance of remembrance for the future of Europe is very important to condemn, to reject actually the fascism, Nazism, or Stalinism. But I would say that the public discourse in Albania in regard, as I mentioned also in my speech, the public discourse in Albania is really is very sensitive about the communist past, and I would say that there are some calls for a greater, as also Professor Navila said, about the greater decommunistization and illustration of the public institution, actually also in the view of justice reform that we are implementing here in Albania. So there are strong voices on for a greater decommunization of the public institutions in Albania and for implementing the transitional justice also. But also there are some, I would say, some reactions, some vicious reactions of the former perpetrators, of the former security, of the former Secret Service officers, who many of them are still holding public offices in Albania. And I would say that the communist era mass crimes, for example, are being publicly downplayed. And even by professional historians, symbols of the former dictatorship, also of the pictures, of images of Enver Hoxha are still reappearing in the public sphere here in Albania. So that's why it's very important to overcome, I would say, the ideology of communism, but still also there are some resolution from the Parliament of Albania. There is this strong legacy of communism felt in every sphere, especially in the everyday life. And to link this question of the overcoming of the ideology with the curricula, or school textbooks, history school textbooks. To my opinion, we have to be very critical towards communism. There was a mass human violation here in Albania, and this human violation is very scarcely, very sporadic mentioned or written in the school textbooks, and that's why many, especially kids in the pre-university level, learners in the high schools, do not know or do not understand what communism really was here in Albania due to this scarcely or due to this lack of information and publication. Also, there are some attempts from public, but also from some private enterprise to build the memory of communism in the forms of museums. For example, here in Tirana, I don't know if you are familiar with Tirana, there are some museums on Bunkart 1, Bunkart 2, or the House of Leaves. But to me as a scholar, to me as a historian of memory of communism, I see those as just a facade. So you don't understand, also from being a student, from being a kid, from being a learner, pupil, you don't understand just by visiting these bunkarts or this House of Leaves what communism was about in Albania. There are some statistical data in the rooms of these three museums about the victims of communism, but the communism is not explained, and maybe it's not a duty of the museum to explain what communism was about. So we need to put our efforts more in the research of communism, especially for the school books. This is very, very important. The education for me is a really an important aspects of dealing seriously in coming to terms with the past in Albania.
in the lack of the complete institutional academic, but there is not a complete lack. There are some attempts recently in the last decades. There are some publishing on the communist past and on communism per se in Albania. But there are some critical approach. One of the person who is very critical on the ways how we deal with the past, and especially in regard to commemoration, memorialization, monuments, memorials, is myself. Sorry for being so modest. I'm one of them, but not only me. There are some, and you will listen tomorrow. I saw the agenda. You will listen tomorrow. Some of the people, researchers, scholars who deal seriously and are very critical in their approach toward communist memories and toward communism per se in Albania. But I'd like to know if there is a critical approach towards memory. Yes, there are some artists in Albania who have a critical approach. There was the former dean of the University of Arts in Tirana, who together with Fatos Lubonia, a former political prisoner and a very strong opinionist today, public opinionist today in Albania, a well-known writer, also a publicist. They have organized some projects in regard in this kind of art view of communism. They have organized the checkpoint, for example. If you're familiar with Tirana, in the main boulevard there is a bunker. There are some columns from the former labor camp of Spachi, where many Albanian intellectuals, the intelligentsia, were put in prison for many years. And this is a kind of open air museum it's a kind of art projection to understand from the art view the communists and the entry of the former block quarter where the Politburo villas, houses were. So there are some attempts there are some exhibition, but very few, I would say. So the third one, Costianiano, thank you, Costian, and thank you to Antonio and to Giovanni. As you said, there are some issues with our history school curricula, especially related to communism era. What is your opinion in the steps that we should take in society, state, to improve it? Yeah, I said, I mean, we have to sit, to research deeply the communists, what happened. The archives, fortunately, are open now, and we need some seriousness. We have to be serious about our past. Also, there is a lack of funding here in Albania, as in. Yeah, thank you, Navila. This is the open air exposition of the checkpoint with the columns of Spachi and the bunker, the typical mushroom, as I said, from the tourists. They are very, very curious about this mushroom, as they called it in the boulevard, in the main boulevard of Tirana. So there is a lack of funding, but everywhere the lack of funding for humanities is really a concern. But we have to deal seriously with communism, because from the way how we dealt with our past, it depends our future, where we are going, where we want to go, what kind of society we want to be. And for me, the transitional justice is a very, very serious path that we have to follow, not only of illustration, of decommunization, but all the memorialization, this culture of memory. I mean, this memory, we have to deal it we have to do more, especially for the young generation who has this, who lack this knowledge, what happened really during the past. So I will give you an example just to relax a little bit. In the class that I have is in explaining, in making this comparison between Nazism, this totalitarian rulers, and Verhoeven and Hitler, and Nazism and communism. A student of mine said, hey, come on, professor, during communism, we don't have these exotic fruits, for example, banana. Now we have banana, we are drinking Coca-Cola, and what? But it's not only on this kind of scarce of food. But communism in corner of the communism and in the middle of this extreme ideologies, whether it be Nazism or communism or fascism, it's the violation of human rights. This is the most important thing that the youth have to know. There were 6,000 people killed or executed, the official data. We don't have the entire view, but officially we know that during communism, there were 6,000 people executed. From them, 1,000 were women killed because they were against or they were portrayed as the enemies of the people. Killed during communism. We have more than 30,000 people put in prison. We have entire families or kinship that were put in these labor camps. And we have to investigate the impact. We have to research more the impact of communism, of this kind of dictatorship, of this ruthless dictatorship on their life, on their own life experiences, and on their trauma. There is a lack of studies, research in trauma of people here in Albania. What happened? What happened with these traumatized peoples? What are they? What is their routine? How do they deal today in their daily lives? And how to deal with the memories. We have to investigate or to research also, or to give a push to the oral history, which is a branch of which is a kind of history that is underdeveloped in Albania. We don't put much importance to the oral history in Albania, to hear the voices of the witnesses of people who suffered, who were the victims of this ruthless regime.
Professor Papa, can we just leave the floor to Professor Civici for one more question, because he has to leave. He has a teaching class at 4:30. So Professor Civici, they are asking you what were the challenges that the economy of Albania faced in the beginning of the transition. Cilat janë disa nga sfidat që ekonomia shqiptare u përball gjatë tranzicionit, në fillimin e tranzicionit.
Në fakt, ne kemi përdorur shpesh fjalën tranzicion, por ajo që ndodhi ekonomisë shqiptare ishte nevoja për një transformim radikal.
We have used the word transformation actually, but what happened to the Albanian economy was actually the need for a transformation.
Dhe ndoshta Shqipëria e filloi, po e la për gjysmë variantin e terapisë shokut për sa i përket shpejtësisë edhe intensitetit reformave.
And maybe left it in the middle, the shock therapy, let's say, that started in order to do the reforms.
Tani neve e kemi të qartë atë që na duke si shprehje me humor që neve shoku na kishte ndodhur, thjesht po kërkonim terapinë që duhet të ndiqim.
And now we laugh at it because we thought that we already were in shock and we just needed the therapy to follow in order to get out of it.
Dhe vështirësia më e madhe për ekonominë shqiptare në periudhën e tranzicionit ishte fakti që ne pothuajse nuk ruajtëm dhe nuk trashëguam asgjë nga ekonomia e vjetër.
And the most difficult part for the Albanian economy was that we did not inherit it, or we did not keep anything from the past economy.
Sepse mënyra si ishte ndërtuar dhe në gjendjen që kishte arritur deri në 90-ën, pothuajse ishte pamundur që ajo të transformohej në kushte normale. Gjithçka ose pothuajse gjithçka filloi nga e para.
Because the way it was built and it was concepted, it made it impossible to preserve the past. So almost everything started from the beginning.
Dhe kjo është arsyeja pse akoma sot mas 30 vitesh ne flasim për nevojën e një ristrukturimi, riformatimi, krijimin e një profili të ekonomisë shqiptare.
And that's the reason why today we still keep talking about the reformation, a profile of the Albanian economy, about reforms.
Pra një ekonomi që akoma ka dobësi strukturore dhe nevojë për reforma strukturore që të marrë formën e saj plot dhe efiqete.
And it's an economy nowadays that it still lacks and still has structural weaknesses, and it would need a lot of work to work through them.
Okay. So thank you, Professor Civiti, for being here with us today. We hope to have you as a speaker in our next year conference, which is an international conference regarding the issue of communisms and how to transmit and remember for the young generation. So
Në vila një dhe thjesht për kënaqësi, një nga librat e fundit që është në anglisht, titulluar Transformimi i Madh, që shpjegon gjithçka ne diskutuam dhe po diskutojmë sot. Me kënaqësi mund t'ju vë një sasi kopjesh në dispozicion për t'ia dhënë pjesëmarrësve.
And Avila, just for pleasure, I would like to say here today that there is a book called The Big Transformation, and which is also translated into English. So I would put in your disposal copies for you to distribute to the participants.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll just share a little of the museum House of Art, House of Leaves, for reference for the next days. There is a building. As you know from the agenda, in the third day, Sunday, 11th, a very small group of students will visit the museum. And for the others, so we'll send you the link so you can go through. It's not much, but at least just to have just go through a little of communist dictatorship. It was supposed, if we would have been in person, it was supposed to go to the National Museum. We have their pavilion only for the communism, but maybe we'll organize it for the next time when you guys will come in Tirana and have a conference next year. So I'll stop sharing here. And thank you, Henrietta. Thank you very much. I appreciate you being here today. Thank you to the students and for very interesting questions. And we'll have tomorrow, we'll have the agenda for tomorrow. I'll just share it, the agenda. We'll start tomorrow, the second day. We'll start at 10 a.m. in the morning. And the meeting will be hosted and moderated from Luciana Lula, from SciDev. We take the opportunity to thank you, SciDev, for today organizing and for being so supportive to the whole event. And then we have some good speakers and researchers, academicians. We'll talk about memory. We'll have a very, very nice speech about the design furniture during communism. We'll talk about law and transitional justice. We'll have one of our students to talk about how was the young socialist man perceived in today and the youth perspective. And definitely we'll have room for question and answers. So for those students that did not answer yet, maybe till in the late afternoon, we'll have still a room for 2 more students to show the House of Leaves and visit the House of Leaves. So thank you very much. Have a very, very good afternoon to everybody. I appreciate you being here with us today. And take your time and reflect. And I hope we'll have a very good session tomorrow too.
Thank you.
Bye.